Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Colado with Architecture Talk Time. Back again with another episode. Today, I am hosting Konrad Soboń, who actually is Polish, just like me, and we just had a wonderful moment of talking Polish to each other. And I promised him to give him a moment to switch back to English. So, why is Konrad here with me? Is because he is a fascinating individual and he worked for a bunch of practices in architecture, including Grimshaw, and currently is running two incredible projects, companies, Bad Monkeys and Bimbeats. And I want to talk a little bit about his entrepreneurial journey as well as the businesses. And looking forward to it. So let's start. Konrad, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, thanks for having me to begin with. You want the short version or a long version of that story?
A longer version, yeah.
A longer. All right. So I usually, when I tell that story, I usually start with me moving from Poland to US. At the time, I was almost 17 years old, so I was a junior in high school. So I got a chance to go to high school here for a couple of years, learn some English, hopefully, and then studied architecture. And thought that I was going to be an architect, worked in architecture, worked in architectural practice for a few years. But there was something in it that kept nagging on me, mostly around technology. I'm not going to go into like the negative things of what was really nagging at me at the time. We'll probably circle back and get around to it. But yeah, worked through architecture, kind of got into technology, got into a little bit of BIM management. From that, moved on, and I think the reason, or kind of like what forced me into more of a programming path was once I moved to New York, once I moved to Grimshaw, the kind of work that we were doing at the time was a lot more challenging, and the software was just not up to it. The things that we were getting out of the box from the software vendors was just not enough, and you had to start building your own tools to be able to deliver the projects that you're working on. So that's what I started getting into, and from that on was software development all the way. Quit the corporate world, started doing my own consulting a few years back, and the rest is history.
Sounds fascinating. I love the fact that you went into consulting, a big fan of consulting altogether. We can talk about it a little bit. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about that sort of transition. We had a chance to introduce ourselves right before this podcast, and we talked a little bit about this massive pain point that architects experience when they go into their first job and receive their first paycheck. And yeah, it's kind of a global problem. I think that pretty much everyone listening to this podcast at any point in time can relate to it. So actually, I know you said you didn't want to go too much into frustrations, but I think it would be very interesting to hear what kind of frustrations made you say, you know what, I'm going to figure it out on my own.
Well, obviously, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just maybe that's just my personality that I always imagine myself. I always imagine myself being successful, right? And that just means that I imagine myself actually making some decent money, and whatever that is in the mind of a child, whatever it means to be successful, having a nice car or house or whatnot, right? Like that's how I imagine myself. And coming from Poland, for some reason, I don't know if I don't think it's like this in the United States, but coming from Poland, being an architect carried around kind of like being a teacher, an enormous amount of kind of respect. And those are the things that I kind of liked, and I imagined that's what I would be getting myself into when I got out of architecture school. It's like, yeah, you're gonna wear a suit to work, you're gonna be an architect, you're gonna make some money, drive that BMW, right? That's not necessarily what happens.
Oh,
Right,
and weirdly enough, I
that's
fell
one.
into the same gap. I fell
So
into
that's
the same trap. That's what I wanted to say. Like, honestly, with believing that, I mean, back in the day, I thought that like architects, lawyers, and medics make money. So got that wrong.
yeah. Well, so I mean, it's a weird thing, but that's kind of the frame of mind that you have choosing the profession, because I mean, I go back to my very first year of college. I didn't go into architecture right away because in US you don't really have to choose the kind of the field of study that you really want to go after. There's like the first 2 years of college. Here you kind of do general education, is what they call it, gen ed, and you're supposed to be completing your English proficiency classes, some history, some sociology, whatever the case might be, right? So I was doing that my first year, and I always tell people the story of like how I ended up in architecture, and to this day I'm pretty sure it's I don't know if it's the worst possible reason of why you end up in there is because you usually pick what you think you like to do or you're going to be good at, right? So when one of my teachers once asked me, Conrad, what do you want to do in life? It's like, pick a school that you want to go to, what you want to study. And on that spot, I said architecture. And at the time, I think it was like an answer because of the circumstances that I was in. I was working construction because like Polish people, when they land in US, we always make a joke that there's a white van waiting for you at the airport, pick you up and take you to a construction site. So that's that's what
Same in
happens.
London, actually, especially at the days when I moved there, which was like early 2000s.
Yeah, so same thing here, right? So if you're Polish in Chicago and you need a summer job, you end up on a construction site somewhere, right? So that's what I was doing at the time, working as a roofer, right, and then going to school. And in the US, you got paid for school, so working was like a way for me to kind of you can pay all of it because schools get to be a little bit more expensive, but you can at least pay for some of it, and you don't have to take a big loan to do that, right? So I was working in construction, and it sounded like moving up in life, and then you have the kind of the ideas of what it means to be an architect at the back of your head, and those two things together kind of pushed me into it, right? But then you end up in the architectural studio where it's just my personality wasn't it wasn't so much about the money because like I still worked a couple of jobs at the time, right? So I was still making good money. When I say couple of jobs, it wasn't like 2 architectural jobs, but I was working my architectural job and some other jobs, and I've had about 15 of them, maybe. We can get into that later, but my friends laugh at me to say I'm a bit of a Renaissance man. So I'm like, I wasn't afraid of picking up extra jobs on the side, but I do get bored and frustrated with things, and architecture seems so repetitive, so arbitrary in a way, right? Like I said, like my personality is that I do get bored with things, and architecture process of delivering or building, designing buildings seemed repetitive. It might be different building, different address, but the process of putting the thing together seemed to be the same, and that kind of frustrated me a little bit. I was looking for new things, and that's how I kind of ended up on the technology side of things. And to take this back to like when I was, because originally I thought I would be a computer, that I would study computer science and that would be a software developer, right? That's why I say it's like picking a profession is such a weird thing because it's completely like an answer of a circumstances at the moment in time that you're in. Because if you ask me what I want to do in life, 3 years before when my teacher asked me that, and I would have been in Poland, and my life was all about computers, software development at the time. That's what my friends were doing. That's what I was doing. We're building websites, building computers. That's what I wanted to do. And if I stayed in Poland and went on to study in Poland, I'd probably just go into computer science at the time, right? So then I find myself in architectural school.
Similar thing now, though, so it's a nice way in which you married it.
Yeah, but it's also a little bit better suiting to my personality because I feel like the frustrating part with architecture was that oftentimes I would find myself like, you're at the bottom of the ladder. So, your manager comes in and is like, hey, give me 3 design options for this particular facade or building or whatnot, right? And then they pick one. And it's arbitrary. Like I could come up with ways to analyze that design process to make it be less arbitrary, to be more about some kind of tangible metrics behind it. But that's never what drives those decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was frustrating me as hell, right? And with computer science, it's not like that. When you're writing software, there's usually a way of making things better, and there is a right and wrong answer in that, right? And that's a much more suitable kind of profession to what my personality is. I didn't like the arbitrary part of the architecture, on top of pay and all that other stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not far you can get to with that. But I love how you explain that. Actually, it's true. And I think combining the two processes, like design thinking, strategy, whatever goes after that, I think when the computer sciences really took over in architecture and we started to use more Grasshopper and like parametricism and whatnot to decide our designs, there was a lot of discussion about like how that takes away from the process. But I think your argument that you spoke to right now really proves that like actually using those tools, you can like achieve better metrics and like make certain decisions that like are kind of a little bit better designed in the respect of like parameters that you put into it, and not just experimentation, whereas I think when you just do like, okay, propose 3 different options for a facade, going back to your example, it is very much like, what metrics do you take for that? Okay, it was just shape, form, whatever.
But right there and then, you already know which one you like the best before you even propose the other 2 or 3 different options, right? And the problem with that, and the most frustrating part of that process, was that which one do you think is the best that you would like to propose, but somebody else making that decision does not necessarily think that that's the best option or the most aesthetically appealing to them option at the moment, and they pick that one, and now you're stuck in the lane that maybe that's now you're working on a building that you don't like anymore right from the get-go.
Yeah.
So I mean, you've had a guest here on your podcast once that I listened to, Dave Pollard, a friend of mine. We used to go to school back in the days together, and he made that point where he, at his company, he was saying that they don't give their clients design options. It's like, you gave me all the metrics for how to make the build or design the building. You gave me all the information that I needed. We had conversations about this. Now I go away, I study those, and I make the best possible choice for what I think is the right design for you. And that's the design that I'll present to you. I'm not going to give you 4 options, because that just perpetuates the conversation and you go on and on. That's probably part of one of the reasons why architecture businesses are not profitable. Right? I mean, you're just chugging through things. You're burning through fee designing things that are not good, and you're going to throw them away. They'll make an argument that's part of the design process, but now we're getting into this. I'm no longer in architecture, so I'm probably not interested in that conversation anymore. I'll let them do it. I'll let them do what they want to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love talking to all these frustrations and, at large, so to speak, and within the architecture industry, so many of us feel it. But somehow you managed to take this and create something new from it. So tell me about that.
So once I got out of the kind of architectural track and started writing software, all of a sudden it was much more interesting, much more fulfilling to me, because now you're solving problems. Now people are excited, you're helping people. So at Grimshaw, my job was pretty much like all day, every day, just solving other people's problems, and that was so cool. I really liked it. Pretty quickly, I realized that there isn't that many. I know this is gonna sound horrible, but there wasn't that many people that could do the things that I could do. So that's how I kind of knew that I could make my way as a consultant. So that's what I did. I waited a little bit, because in US there's this thing called health insurance that you pretty much, as an entrepreneur, kind of have to always have at the back of your head, where because it's tied to your employment or place of employment, right? So most of the people in US will actually get their health insurance through their employer. So they do work for companies, and that's kind of how this works here, right? So when you're quitting and you're starting your own company, or you're becoming a consultant, and all of a sudden you have to, like, these are all added expenses, right? So these are the things that you have to think about. And at the time, my wife was still at school; she was still studying, so I had to. I'm also very, kind of. I always want to be prepared for things. I kind of want to. I always err on the side of the worst case scenario, right? So I didn't quit. I didn't quit architecture. I didn't quit working for companies until I was sure that I can kind of find my way in there. I had enough savings to be able to support myself, my wife at the time, and that was kind of took me a little bit longer than other people. So when I say other people, it's when I was quitting, where I was really setting up Bad Monkeys with a couple of my friends. Howard, Adam, Dimitar, Andreas, and Marcelo and Julian. I think I got them all. So shout out to those guys. And at the time, it wasn't just me. So right around the same time, Howard and Adam, I think, both quit their corporate jobs and set up shops. And I think Howard's company was actually called Bad Monkeys. Adam's was called something else, in the works maybe. And I called mine Bad Monkeys as well here in the US. So that was kind of our consulting business, and the idea was that we would collaborate together, even though we were in different countries. We wanted to do, software development, solve other people's problems through that in architectural and engineering world, and we agreed that we would, share work and collaborate on projects together, which we did. And it's been a lot of fun. Since then, actually, I changed the name of the company recently. I think Howard did too, and Adam as well. Bad Monkeys does not really play well with corporations, especially with people that are writing your checks. Oftentimes, funny thing is when I go to a bank to like a cash a check that's still made out to, and in the US we still get checks, paper checks, like literal paper on it. That's made out to Bad Monkeys. The tellers at the bank always laugh at me and ask what I do. They like rent party equipment or something. Like, is that my company? So I always have to explain what that is. So Bad Monkeys was probably a fun name for a group of people, but not a great name for a company.
I actually thought it was really smart. I interviewed Howard just last week. Basically, it was really lovely meeting him as well, having his perspective, very Norwegian perspective onto whatever we're talking about. And yeah, but I thought it was a really clever name. And especially that as part of all this consultancy and collaboration, you actually grew quite a hefty community, a strong community around you guys, and it's nice to identify as a bad monkey, I guess, now as a community member. So that's kind of cool. I mean, not everyone can say that. Some companies have names that get adopted, and like the community calls themselves. I know that for big, they call themselves bigsters, but not everyone can say that or do it with all the company names. So basically, given the fact that you kind of cater for communities, that having a community and nourishing that community is a big aspect, and also that you're coaching and consulting, I think that it kind of is fitting, and I really like it. I think it's smart.
I mean, we still have the website up, and we still use that name, but yeah, it's just that I really thought it was a great name for the community. I think that's how we still brand it, where we say, Archilab or Reop or Automation, part of the Bad Monkeys community, because it's more of a, not all of us, they're Bad Monkeys, run their own consultancies or businesses or whatever the case might be, right? So we kind of we wanted to separate those two a little bit, as not to get anybody in trouble that might still be working in the corporate world. But yeah, it is very much it is very much a community. I mean, I can't imagine myself being able to quit and start working as a consultant without having those past few years of working and collaborating with those guys from Bad Monkeys. And in general, just being not so much like the Bad Monkeys, but also the kind of technology and computational design community at large, right? Because a lot of the work and kind of know-how, or the fact that people recognize my name or offer me jobs or whatnot, comes from the fact that Howard, myself, Adam, and all the rest of the guys spend a ton of time on different forums, helping people out and answering questions for them on forums and building tools. They were open source and published out there for everyone to use. They were free. That's how people kind of got to know us, and that's how, like when you quit, there's ways of. This was kind of a way for me to know that people recognize me or in a way trust me. Also, this was a weird one, and very very humbling sometimes, because after we started, a couple of years later, we started a company called Bimbeats, and one of the coolest thing that's ever happened is that when you're just starting a company and you're trying to sell software, like nobody's buying, right? Or it's very hard to try to sell this to anybody, because everyone's kind of, what is this? Do we really need it, or is it even going to be around? And especially that in the AC industry, there was always what I call this flux effect. Was this company called Flux that's been selling software, and they went bankrupt after a couple of years, and a lot of companies fell. A lot of AC companies invested in them to begin with, and a lot of companies spend their time and effort learning and investing their time and their people's time into that company, and then all of a sudden they just pull out. And I didn't go bankrupt, but they just pulled out because they realized that they couldn't make money, and pulled back the tools, right? So there was this flux effect when people were very skeptical of Bimbeats originally, and asking questions about, are you guys gonna, disappear in a year? Why would we invest our time and effort into into the software if it's gonna disappear, right? So we kind of have to get over that hump with a lot of companies. And one of the things that helped massively, and this is like the coolest thing that's ever happened, is I had conversations with one of the design technology leaders of the company, and he's like, Conrad, they literally said this, is like, Conrad, I don't know that we need this software. I don't know that we're gonna use it a whole lot, but I really love what you've been doing in the open source community, helping people out and answering all these questions on forums and whatnot. I know you, I feel I can trust you, and we're gonna buy, right? And this was like, oh my goodness, this is awesome, this is amazing, right? So the community, the Bad Monkeys community, the work that we put in, and at the time you didn't even think about it. Like it's not like you're sitting there. It's just a way of learning, right? Because the best way to learn probably is to teach other people, right? So running workshops or answering questions in forums is just a way for you to verbalize your own thoughts, right? And then you kind of yourself grow and become better at those things that you kind of trying to help other people out. Also, like I cannot for the life of God come up with, I don't invent problems. It's like you got all these other people out there that invent problems and issues that they have. So trying to help them out is kind of, super cool, but also a little selfish in a way, because it makes me better at what I do. And it has this like unintended consequence of people kind of recognizing you after a while. So all of those things were kind of unintentional, but very, very, very good for you when you're starting out and going into the consulting world.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for explaining it. I actually wanted to ask you a little bit more about your approach to open source. I know it's super important for you. You talk about it on your blog and on your website, and you dropped it here as well. And especially for software, I think that it's quite a disruptive way to do things. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, this was always kind of natural for me, at least in my head. This was like the natural way to go when developing software, right? So I will go back and I will give a shout out to a person by the name of Mustafa, and Mustafa knows who he is. There might be a lot of Mustafas out there, but he knows what I'm talking about. So Mustafa introduced me to open source. He was the first person that kind of got me introduced to it, and the idea of building things that would be available for other people And then because they're open source, there is this incentive for other people to also contribute to your project, because they know that you're not kind of locking it away behind the closed doors. And even if you want to sell that project, like a lot of people confuse these things. Like open source is not necessarily meaning that it's going to be free forever. You can write open source tools and then sell them, right? Those two things are not mutually exclusive, which is exactly what Mustafa's doing, anyways. But he introduced me to that open source idea, and I was instantly hooked in. Because again, the idea goes back to what I was talking about, going out there, helping people in forums, answering questions, writing software that's open source, then all of a sudden people are willing to help and contribute to that, right? So now you're getting feedback from people. Now you're getting, if you're lucky and if your project is really good and you're actually paying attention to it, because it's not, oftentimes, and I'm guilty of that as well, is you will write something, you will put it out there, and then that's it. You kind of just lay it by the sideways, and it just doesn't, you don't work on it continually. So I have a few graveyards like this, a few graveyard projects like this myself. But if you stick with it, the open source projects oftentimes pick up a community and they build communities around it. And Mustafa's been very, very successful with Ladybug tools and Honeybee tools, building a very big community around those tools because they're open source and people are contributing to them. And a lot of the tools that they built in there were tools eventually built and contributed by other third parties. And because they were open source, people feel like they can contribute those and they're not going to be taken advantage of per se, right? As opposed to, it's like, oh, Autodesk is selling something to you, right? I can go and help them solve their problem. Like this is what like Dynamo's struggling with, I would imagine. As a tool, it's open source, but because it's this kind of commercial entity behind it, a lot of people will kind of contribute certain things to it, but not necessarily for free. And it's just not working how everyone would imagine it would work, right? But at the time, for a long time, but that's why I used to do when I was at Grimshaw. The funny thing is, nobody even knew that we were doing this at Grimshaw, and only about 2 years into it, one of our partners at the company realized we're doing an internal presentation and told them that here's all the tools that we've developed and they're open source and they're out there on the market. And they ask us like, who's using them? Like everyone. I mean, I get emails from all of our competitors, ACOMs and SOMs and all those other companies every day asking me questions about this. Because they're using it for their projects. Like, are we getting any money for this? It's like the first question they'll ask you. But yeah, it's a great way to build connections, build a community. Not every open source project becomes popular when it gets adopted. Oftentimes they just die their own slow little death. But I thought it was a very valuable way of working for the AC industry that contributed something valuable.
Sure. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, your life journey, your career journey, and basically all these incredible things that inspired you to get to where you are. I think that what you're creating is really interesting and it's valid, and really needed in our industry as well. Especially, I really stand for building communities and giving value through that, process. So kudos. If anyone wants to connect with you, where do they find you or Bad Monkeys?
If anybody wants to connect with me, I actually run a blog called archilab.net. So that's a good way to connect with me. You can also find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is arc_laboratory. And I'm out there online. It's pretty easy to find me. We also have a software company called Bimbeats that Adam and I have been running for a couple of years now. So bimbeats.com. If anybody's interested, they can go to that as well. There's a contact me page there, so you can find me there.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and listened in. We'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.